Trump didn't leave the building immediately. Instead, he chose a quiet seat in the lobby, away from the desk but close enough to observe the rhythm of the hotel. The soft music continued to play, and guests moved in and out, unaware that something important was unfolding. From where he sat, Trump watched how the staff interacted with different people. Guests dressed in expensive suits were greeted warmly, their bags taken without hesitation. Others were met with indifference, their presence barely acknowledged. A young bellboy hesitated before helping an elderly couple, glancing nervously toward the manager before finally stepping forward. A cleaner was corrected sharply in front of guests for a minor mistake. Trump remained silent, his expression calm, his posture relaxed, but his attention was sharp. Minutes later, a young receptionist noticed him sitting alone. Unlike the others, she approached with a genuine smile and asked if he needed assistance. Trump thanked her kindly and said he was just waiting. That small moment of respect stood out in a place where judgment seemed to come first. The receptionist nodded and returned to her station, unaware that her simple kindness had been noticed and remembered. Trump reached into his pocket and made a short phone call. His voice was low, controlled, and brief. He didn't raise his tone or show frustration. When the call ended, he placed the phone back in his pocket and continued to wait. Behind the front desk, things slowly began to change. Phones rang more frequently. Staff members exchanged confused looks. The manager, who moments earlier had been confident and dismissive, began to appear uneasy. He checked the reservation system again, then again, his movements growing tense. Whispers traveled across the desk as supervisors quietly asked one another what was happening. The lobby's calm atmosphere shifted into something tighter, heavier, as if the air itself had changed. Then the glass doors opened once more. A well-dressed man entered with purpose, his presence immediately commanding attention. This was a senior executive from the hotel's ownership group, someone whose arrival was never casual. He didn't stop at the front desk or acknowledge the manager. His eyes scanned the lobby until they landed on Trump. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward him, extended his hand, and greeted him respectfully by name. Conversation stopped. Footsteps paused. Every eye in the lobby turned toward them. Trump stood up calmly and shook the executive's hand. Their exchange was quiet but serious. The executive listened closely as Trump explained what had happened at the front desk, repeating the manager's words exactly as they had been spoken. There was no anger in his voice, only clarity. The executive's expression tightened. He thanked Trump and turned slowly toward the front desk, where the manager stood frozen, realizing too late the weight of his mistake. The executive addressed the situation immediately. He spoke firmly about the hotel's values and the responsibility that came with representing them. He made it clear that respect was not optional and that judging guests based on appearance had no place in the business. Trump then stepped forward and spoke to the room. His voice was calm but carried authority. He explained that true leadership reveals itself in small moments, how people are treated when there is nothing to gain. Luxury, he said, is not about chandeliers or price tags, but about dignity. The manager was removed from his position that same evening. Not because he failed to recognize Donald Trump, but because he failed to respect a fellow human being. The young receptionist who had shown kindness was praised in front of her colleagues. The staff members who had been mistreated were acknowledged and reassured. The mood of the lobby shifted from tension to reflection, as everyone absorbed the lesson unfolding before them. Later, Trump was offered the hotel's finest suite. He declined politely and chose a standard room instead. Before heading upstairs, he thanked the staff and left them with a final reminder that respect should never depend on status or appearance. As the night settled, guests left with a story they would never forget, and the hotel began a new chapter, one built not on luxury alone, but on character. The minutes that followed felt ordinary to everyone else, but beneath the surface, the hotel was slowly drifting toward a turning point. Trump remained seated, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. The lobby continued its routine rhythm, doors opening, suitcases rolling, quiet conversations filling the air. Yet Trump's presence seemed to sharpen the scene, as if he were reading between the movements. He noticed how the manager's tone softened instantly when a well-dressed guest approached, how apologies were offered quickly to some and never to others. Every interaction revealed something about the culture of the place, and none of it went unnoticed. As time passed, the young receptionist glanced over at Trump again. There was something different about the way he waited, no impatience, no frustration, just calm certainty. She returned to her desk, but her earlier kindness lingered in the air. Trump leaned back slightly and reflected, not just on the insult, but on what it represented. In businesses like hotels, first impressions were everything. If respect was missing at the entrance, it rarely existed deeper inside. His phone vibrated softly with a reply to his earlier call. He read it once, nodded to himself, and slipped the phone away. Behind the desk, subtle tension began to build. A supervisor whispered to the manager, pointing discreetly toward Trump. The manager frowned, confused, then waved it off, forcing a laugh. He was still convinced the situation was under control. But moments later, another phone rang. This time, the manager answered it himself. As he listened, his confident posture stiffened. His smile faded. He glanced toward Trump again, this time with uncertainty rather than arrogance. Something was happening, something he hadn't anticipated. Guests began to sense the shift. Conversations quieted. Staff members moved with caution, exchanging nervous looks. The polished calm of the hotel started to crack. Trump remained seated through it all, patient and composed, as though he had all the time in the world. He watched as the elderly couple finally received help from a bellboy who seemed suddenly more attentive. He saw staff members adjust their behavior, not out of understanding, but fear. It was a change driven by pressure, not principle. Then the entrance doors opened once again, and the atmosphere changed instantly. A senior executive stepped inside, his presence commanding silence without a word. His walk was purposeful, his expression serious. Employees straightened. The manager instinctively stepped forward, but the executive didn't even look at him. His attention was fixed on Trump. He crossed the lobby, extended his hand, and greeted him with clear respect. The effect was immediate. Guests stared. Staff froze. The manager felt the ground shift beneath him. Trump rose calmly and returned the handshake. Their exchange was brief but meaningful. Trump spoke quietly, explaining exactly what had happened, word for word. He did not dramatize the insult or raise his voice. He simply presented the truth. The executive listened carefully, his expression tightening with every sentence. When Trump finished, the executive nodded and turned slowly toward the front desk. All eyes followed. What followed was swift and decisive. The executive addressed the manager with firm disappointment, making it clear that the issue was not a missed reservation, but a failure of judgment and values. Respect, he said, was not something to be given selectively. It was the foundation of the business. Trump then stepped forward, addressing the room in a calm, steady voice. He spoke about leadership, explaining that power reveals itself not in grand moments, but in everyday behavior. How people are treated when they believe no one important is watching defines who they truly are. The manager was relieved of his duties that very evening. The young receptionist was thanked publicly for her kindness. Staff members who had been mistreated were acknowledged. The lobby, once filled with quiet judgment, now felt heavy with reflection. When Trump was offered the finest suite, he declined, choosing simplicity over excess. As he headed upstairs, the lesson remained behind, etched into the minds of everyone who had witnessed how quiet patience and character could reshape an entire room. The silence that followed felt heavy, as if the entire lobby was holding its breath. The manager stood frozen behind the desk, suddenly aware that every decision he had made in the last hour was about to be judged. The executive's eyes rested on him, not with anger, but with disappointment, a look far more unsettling. Trump remained composed, standing beside the executive, his hands relaxed at his sides. He had said everything that needed to be said. Now, the truth was doing the work for him. The executive stepped forward and spoke in a clear, firm voice that carried across the lobby. He explained that the hotel prided itself on excellence, not just in appearance, but in conduct. He reminded everyone that a luxury brand is built on trust, respect, and consistency. One careless judgment, he said, could undo years of reputation. The manager attempted to speak, stumbling over his words, offering excuses that only deepened the silence. Each explanation sounded weaker than the last. It became obvious that this was no longer about policies or bookings, it was about values. Trump was then invited to speak. He didn't raise his voice or seek attention. Instead, he addressed both staff and guests with calm authority. He spoke about leadership and responsibility, explaining that positions of power reveal who a person truly is. He noted that anyone can show respect when it is convenient, but true character appears when no reward is expected. The lobby listened closely. Even the guests who had been passing through moments earlier now stood still, aware they were witnessing something meaningful. The executive nodded in agreement and made a decision on the spot. The manager was informed that he would no longer represent the hotel. Not because he failed to recognize a well-known name, but because he failed to treat a guest with basic dignity. The words landed quietly but firmly. There was no applause, no celebration, just understanding. The young receptionist who had shown kindness earlier was called forward and thanked publicly. Her simple act was praised as an example of what the hotel stood for. Other staff members lowered their heads, reflecting on moments they had stayed silent instead of speaking up. The atmosphere in the lobby began to change again, this time for the better. Tension slowly gave way to relief. Employees straightened their posture, not out of fear, but clarity. Guests exchanged thoughtful looks. Some nodded subtly, as if acknowledging a lesson they would carry with them beyond that night. Trump stood quietly, allowing the moment to settle. He hadn't come seeking recognition, yet his presence had reshaped the room. When the executive offered Trump the finest suite available, he declined politely. He explained that comfort did not require excess, and that a simple room was more than enough. That decision surprised many. It reinforced everything he had just said. Before heading upstairs, Trump thanked the staff for their time and professionalism, encouraging them to remember that respect is the foundation of every successful place. His words were brief, but they lingered long after he left the lobby. As the elevator doors closed behind him, conversations slowly resumed. The hotel returned to its routine, but it was no longer the same. Employees moved with greater awareness. Guests were greeted with genuine warmth. A quiet understanding had settled over the space, one that could not be taught in manuals or training sessions. It had been learned through example. That night became a turning point, not because of who Trump was, but because of how he responded. He chose patience over pride, observation over reaction, and principle over ego. The story spread quietly among staff, then beyond the hotel walls, becoming a reminder that true power doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself through calm confidence, steady actions, and the courage to stand for respect when it matters most. The room remained silent as Trump finished speaking, his words settling slowly into the minds of everyone present. There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, just a deep, thoughtful stillness. People weren't shocked by anger or confrontation, they were struck by clarity. Trump's message wasn't loud, but it carried weight. He had turned an uncomfortable moment into a lesson that reached every corner of the lobby. Staff members who had been standing rigid now relaxed slightly, as if a burden had been lifted. Guests who had witnessed the earlier insult looked on with a new sense of understanding. The executive stepped forward again, reinforcing Trump's words with action. He addressed the staff directly, reminding them that every role in the hotel mattered. From the front desk to housekeeping, each person represented the brand the moment they interacted with a guest. Policies and procedures were important, he said, but character was essential. Without it, no amount of luxury could protect a business from failure. Heads nodded quietly. Some employees felt regret for moments they had stayed silent. Others felt encouraged, realizing that kindness and professionalism were finally being valued. The former manager stood off to the side, no longer in control, watching the scene unfold. There was no public humiliation, no shouting. The decision had been firm, respectful, and final. That alone sent a powerful message. Leadership, everyone could see now, didn't need cruelty to be effective. It required fairness, accountability, and the courage to act when values were compromised. Trump hadn't demanded the manager's removal, he had simply revealed the truth and allowed leadership to respond. Attention then returned to the young receptionist. She stood nervously as the executive thanked her for treating every guest with respect, regardless of appearance or status. Her face flushed with surprise. She hadn't expected recognition, she had only acted out of basic decency. That moment resonated deeply with the staff. It showed that small actions mattered, and that integrity didn't go unnoticed. Other employees who had felt overlooked began to stand a little taller, realizing their behavior carried real impact. Trump took a moment to look around the lobby one last time. His expression was calm, almost reflective. He reminded everyone that success, whether in business or life, was built on how people were treated during ordinary moments. Mistakes could be corrected, he said, but arrogance blinded people to their own flaws. Businesses didn't fail overnight, they failed slowly, through repeated acts of disrespect that went unchallenged. His words were simple, but they struck deep. When the executive once again offered Trump the hotel's most luxurious suite, the room waited for his response. Trump smiled politely and declined. He explained that he didn't need special treatment to feel respected. A clean, quiet room was enough. That decision surprised many guests and reinforced everything he had said about true luxury. Respect, not excess, was what mattered most. As Trump prepared to leave the lobby, staff members stepped aside instinctively, not out of fear, but admiration. Several guests quietly nodded at him as he passed. No one interrupted him. No one asked for attention. The moment didn't need anything more. The lesson had already been delivered. After Trump disappeared into the elevator, the lobby slowly returned to motion. But something had changed. Conversations felt softer. Greetings felt warmer. Staff members moved with a renewed sense of purpose. The hotel, once defined by appearances, was now being reshaped by values. What had started as a moment of disrespect had become a defining turning point. Long after that night, employees would remember what they had witnessed. New hires would hear the story during training. Guests would notice the difference in how they were welcomed. And the message would live on quietly but powerfully: real leadership doesn't demand respect, it earns it. In that lobby, on an ordinary evening, leadership had been displayed in its purest form, and everyone who saw it carried the lesson with them. As the evening drew to a close, the lobby slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the feeling in the air was unmistakably different. The polished floors, the soft lighting, and the gentle background music were the same, yet something deeper had shifted. Staff members moved with greater awareness, greeting guests with genuine warmth rather than rehearsed politeness. Every interaction now seemed more intentional, as if everyone understood that they were part of something larger than a routine shift. The events of the night had left a mark that no renovation or policy manual ever could. Trump's decision to choose a standard room became a quiet symbol of everything he had demonstrated that evening. It wasn't an act meant to impress, it was a reflection of his message. Comfort did not come from extravagance, but from respect. Some guests who had witnessed the scene whispered among themselves, replaying each moment, each word. They weren't just talking about who Trump was, but about what he represented in that moment. Many realized they had seen leadership without arrogance, authority without intimidation, and strength without noise. Behind the scenes, the hotel's staff gathered briefly with senior leadership. There was no blame passed around, no harsh lectures. Instead, there was clarity. Expectations were reset. Values were reaffirmed. Employees were reminded that every guest walking through the doors carried a story, and none of those stories could be judged at first glance. For some staff members, it was the first time they felt truly seen and heard. For others, it was a moment of reflection, a chance to recognize where they could do better. The young receptionist returned to her desk with a new sense of confidence. She hadn't acted with the intention of being noticed, yet her kindness had become a powerful example. Her co-workers looked at her differently now, not with envy, but respect. It was a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it seems small, can ripple outward in unexpected ways. That single moment of decency had helped shift the course of an entire evening. As guests retired to their rooms, many carried the lesson with them. Some thought about times they had judged others too quickly. Others reflected on moments when they had stayed silent instead of speaking up. The hotel, once just a place to stay, had become a stage for something meaningful. The walls had witnessed a reminder that status is temporary, but character leaves a lasting impression. In the days that followed, the story quietly spread. It moved from staff conversations to guest reviews, from casual retellings to thoughtful discussions. It wasn't shared as gossip, but as a lesson. People spoke less about the insult and more about the response. They talked about patience, restraint, and the power of letting actions speak louder than words. The hotel itself began to earn a different reputation, one rooted not just in luxury, but in humanity. For Trump, the night ended without fanfare. There were no speeches afterward, no public statements, no demands for recognition. He had said what needed to be said and left the rest to example. That was the most powerful part of all. He didn't seek to dominate the moment, he allowed it to teach. In doing so, he reminded everyone present that true influence comes from integrity. Long after that night faded into memory, the lesson remained. New staff members would hear the story during training. Guests would feel the difference without ever knowing why. The hotel would continue operating, but with a quieter strength at its core. What had begun as a moment of disrespect had become a turning point, not through anger or revenge, but through calm resolve. That evening proved something timeless. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush or react. It waits, observes, and responds with purpose. A hotel manager may have underestimated a guest, but the world was reminded that leadership, humility, and character never go out of style. And that is why, long after the lights dimmed and the doors closed, the lesson of that night remained truly legendary. If this story touched your heart, like this video to support the message. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. And comment below, what lesson did you take from Eli's story? Your support helps these stories reach more people. Thanks.